Batwoman on the same level as Black Panther? Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Bullshit, I tell you. Complete bullshit.
Coming to Kickstarter this June, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the standard and variant editions of John Haynes at Death's Door and lots of other great stretch goal rewards on Kickstarter this June. Batwoman actress Javica Leslie says that Batwoman did for TV what Black Panther did for movies. I just need a minute because there's no way you can compare what Black Panther did for the movies to what Batwoman did for TV. Now, your Black Panther, when it was released in 2018, went on to become a box office phenomenon. And this box office phenomenon was the #1 movie in America for 2018, went on to gross over $1 billion globally, and was nominated for several Oscars, including Best Picture and I believe Best Costumes. So there's no way you can compare what your Black Panther did for the movies, because what your Black Panther did for the movies was basically revolutionize things to show us that there is a market for black fantasy movies, and showing us that there was a large black audience ready to watch a fantasy movie featuring a black lead. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, everybody has been trying to sabotage that growing market for black fantasy, and your Batwoman was just another cog that they were using to try to sabotage the machine that is out here for making black fantasy projects. Now, your Batwoman did not do anything for TV like what Black Panther did for the movies, because your Batwoman basically was a token that they were hiring to try to save a show that had already been struggling in the ratings due to it being not accurate to the source material. Now, the first season of Batwoman, starring Ruby Rose, was practically panned by critics and roasted by many comic fans for not following the source material of the critically acclaimed 2011 comic book. And because the show was struggling in the ratings and had alienated its core white comic audience, what the CW's producers Greg Berlanti and Caroline Dries did was go out here and hire Javica Leslie in a desperate attempt to try to pander to the black audience. So your Javica Leslie was basically a token person put to fill the costume of Batwoman in a desperate attempt to try to trick black viewers into believing that Batwoman was a black show. But this whole ploy completely failed, and it failed because most black viewers saw all through the stereotypes of Ryan Wilder, a homeless black woman living in a van down by the river who was living with her mama before that. So most black people saw through all of the stereotypes on Batwoman, and that's why your Batwoman didn't do anything on television, because most of the black audiences that the CW was trying to pander to were turned off by the racism as related to how this so-called black Batwoman got her costume, because your black Batwoman, who was living in a van down by the river, finds the Batwoman costume as it's coming out of a plane that's crashing. And as this Batwoman costume is discarded, just like so much garbage, this inexperienced woman with no fighting skills, no training, and no background whatsoever in anything just decides to pick up a Batwoman costume and be Batwoman. I mean, it's very similar to what happened with Casper Cole, the biracial Black Panther who found the Black Panther suit in the garbage and decided to be the Black Panther. But it's an insult to foundational Black Americans to say that you decide to be a hero because somebody found a suit in the garbage and you're willing to take somebody's hand-me-down costume that was part of somebody's trash, and you're going to use this hand-me-down costume that came out of a white person's trash to be a hero to Black people. That's a complete insult to Black people, basically taking us back to the dark days of slavery, when the slave master would give you his worn out clothes and you would think that this would be something special because he gave you some worn out clothes that he farted in, and you should be grateful for those worn out clothes. And that's why I say your Batwoman didn't do anything on TV like Black Panther did for the movies, because what Batwoman did on TV was make it just that much harder for other Black fantasy creators like myself to go out here and build on the momentum from the phenomenon of Black Panther. Because ever since Black Panther showed the world that there was a market for Black fantasy, Black science fiction, and an audience ready to spend money to see Black fantasy and Black science fiction, what Hollywood has been doing is trying to sabotage the Black fantasy market by creating a whole host of poor quality products by Black bootlicks like Ava DuVernay, who came out with the movie A Wrinkle in Time, which was an absolutely terrible film that came 1 week after Black Panther, and that was by design to try to sabotage Black Panther's momentum and try to make an excuse for white executives to say that there was no audience for Black fantasy movies. And as this went on, your CW joined on to this campaign, and what they wanted to do with Black Batwoman was say that a Black character could not carry a TV show, because passively, by including Javica Leslie in this role as a token, they were adding a Black character, but they already knew that the show was structurally damaged during the days that white actress Ruby Rose was on the show, and the show was getting critically panned and roasted. So there's been an effort to sabotage Black fantasy and Black science fiction and stop the momentum of Black Panther, and that's why, again, your Batwoman did nothing for the TV like Black Panther did for the movies, and what they really did was make it where we wouldn't be able to build momentum and get new projects out there from independent Black creators like myself and many others. The Batwoman show didn't really have a cultural impact like Black Panther. No, not at all, because there weren't many people watching Batwoman the way everybody went out here to go see Black Panther. I mean, Black Panther, again, went on to be the #1 movie in America for the entire year of 2018, was nominated for multiple Oscars, and had merchandise that practically sold out at Hasbro, and Hasbro had to come back with a second wave of merchandise later in the year. Tell me where we see anybody clamoring for Javica Leslie Batwoman action figures the way they are for Black Panther figures. In fact, when we look at Black Panther's merchandising, Hasbro is now releasing a third reissue wave of Black Panther figures, so that still shows us there is an audience still out there looking to buy Marvel Legends featuring Black Panther and other merchandise featuring Black Panther. But is there anybody asking for a Javica Leslie Batwoman action figure? no one has really asked for a Javica Leslie Batwoman action figure, and they haven't asked for that beta male who Luke Fox, who works with her as Batwing or in his typical butler costume. No, there was no phenomenon as related to Batwoman, because the only people who were watching Batwoman were mostly YouTubers who on the comic scene who were looking for content to roast every week, as they talked about how this show was absolutely terrible. So most of the only viewers out there were only YouTubers, and this show only got the audience of maybe 400,000 a week, and that was even less than many YouTube channels do in a week. I mean, many of the top YouTube channels out here that produce content, many of these content creators, they get over 500,000 views for videos, the top tier ones every week, and even the most popular ones get 1 million views a week. That's way more than what Batwoman was doing, and Batwoman was costing $1 to $3 million an episode, and when a show is costing $1 to $3 million an episode and it's doing worse than a YouTube channel, that is an embarrassment to a movie studio, and that's why your David Zaslav pulled the plug on Batwoman, because your Batwoman didn't do anything for the CW, and it wasn't pulling a profit for the CW in the 3 years it was on the air. So that already pokes a hole in Javica Leslie's absolutely ridiculous argument, because if Batwoman was doing as well as Black Panther did in its first movie with the late Chadwick Boseman, that film would be bigger than anything, because if Batwoman was pulling Black Panther numbers, we would be seeing this show getting 20 to 25 million views a week, which is what the Cosby Show used to pull back in the 1980s, and that show was a phenomenon in the 80s, just like Black Panther was a phenomenon in 2018. And that's when you can compare Batwoman to Black Panther, because Black Panther, like the Cosby Show, was a phenomenon that was an incredible success, and it really changed the way people saw black people. And if I want to talk about a comparison of your Batwoman, it basically reminds me of a lot of the knockoff shows that came out after the Cosby Show. Like there was one called Homeroom, which I think featured Daryl Siviad, and a host of other black shows that came and went that were trying to copy the Cosby Show or capitalize on the Cosby Show, but never really caught on. And that's what Batwoman really reminds me of, because this wannabe coattail riding superhero, they were trying to make it where they were trying to appeal to black audiences. Unfortunately, like I stated before, many in the black audience, we weren't interested in seeing your Batwoman, because she was a hand-me-down hero. She did not have her own story. She did not have her own rogues gallery. She did not have good motivation to go out here and protect Gotham City. No, she was a hand-me-down hero in a hand-me-down costume, and she was just there to be a placeholder to meet an affirmative action quota. And after the success of Black Panther, black people said to themselves, we can do better than having a black character be a white person's hand-me-down. We want better than a black person in a white person's hand-me-down costume. We want better than a black person in a hand-me-down story. No, with all of these great independent black creators out here, like myself and many others, who have fantastic concepts, it's time for us to have our own stories from our own creators and show our own culture and our own experience on screen, because we we have our own culture and our own world and our own perspective on fantasy, and we want to see our stories, our culture, and our experiences presented on screen and have an opportunity to tell our own stories and not have to deal with some white guy's interpretation of what black is. That's what many black viewers and many black people who like fantasy, like myself, talk about all the time. We want our own stories, and Black Panther shows us that there is a market for those stories, only Hollywood doesn't want to go out here and present our own stories because they don't like the idea of seeing black images that inspire and influence black people. No, they don't want you to see a black creator creating our own stories and our own experiences, and they don't like the idea of paying a black creator, because paying a black creator to use their intellectual properties, this is what creates black wealth. And this is another reason why many in Hollywood don't want to see the black fantasy market grow, because if the black fantasy market grows, that means black creators are the ones who are going to profit in the new millennium, and the black image is going to change, because as kids start seeing more and more black superheroes and more black fantasy characters, it's going to change their perception of the world. Because I see that right now when I interact with people online. They tell me about John Haynes. They tell me how much they like the character and how the character really has an effect on them. And I also hear it from people about other characters I've created, like Isis and Matilda Crowley and Easting, people telling me how these black characters really changed their perspective on themselves, changed their perspective on the culture, and really gave them a perspective on black culture that they never saw in any other form of white media. When you have kids, people, especially children, and they're growing up with black characters, and they're, especially if they're coming from black creators and they're really giving you a whole different perspective on things, it really changes the way kids see themselves, and many start to see themselves with pride. And that's the thing that your Hollywood does not want out here. So what they do, because they is passively give you a token like Batwoman, tell you that she is a phenomenon, tell you she is on the level of Black Panther, but what they want to do is use a Batwoman as an excuse to not go out here and pick up properties like those like I have on the SJS Direct imprint and those of other black creators. They use Batwoman to say passively, okay, we had a show with a black character, Batwoman, and it failed, so now we can't greenlight these other projects that are building an audience because there's no black audience for those products. Meanwhile, there is a growing black fantasy and science fiction market that Hollywood refuses to acknowledge because they want to go out here and ensure that the heroes remain white, because in white supremacist America, they want the heroes to stay white, and they want everybody looking up at these white heroes because they want to be the hero of the story. So your Batwoman did nothing except really make it that much harder for black creators to get characters to the marketplace, and it was nowhere near the level of Black Panther. So your Javica Leslie is extremely delusional when she sits there and tells us, oh, your Ryan Wilder had an impact on people. How can your character have an impact on people like T'Challa did when your character wasn't even seen by most of the audiences in America? Because the numbers that your Batwoman was making was less than a neighborhood here in New York City. I mean, a neighborhood here in New York City is 400,000 people, and in a nation of over 350 million people, this Batwoman show was seen by next to no one outside of a handful of YouTubers who were basically using it as fodder to roast to get money on their channel. So I was reading this article and I was reading the statements made in this comic book resources article, and this article, it just is absolutely ridiculous because, again, when we look at Batwoman, it was nowhere near the level of Black Panther. It was not even on the level of other black shows like Mantis. I mean, Mantis had a bigger impact in the 90s than Batwoman, and Mantis was seen by more people and had more of a following than this ridiculous Batwoman show. And I'd have to say your Javica Leslie is quite batty to believe that Batwoman was so big that when Batwoman was nothing more than a blip on the radar and a footnote as related to the annals of black comic, sci-fi, and fantasy history. Now, if you want to pick up my books featuring heroines such as the Isis and E-Steam series, you can find The Adventures of the Goddess Next Door and Hell's Aspiring Angel, along with the Spinsterella trilogy, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find Isis and E-Steam series books on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And my new comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, will be available on Kickstarter on June 22nd, and you can sign up to be a part of the mailing list to know when that book launches on June 22nd. And if you want to see me do more comic-related videos, sci-fi related videos, and fantasy related videos, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's Aspiring Angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today.